I'm trying something new with my hair. I'm trying to grow out the mohawk bit to be as long as possible, but whenever I don't have it styled up, I have it like swooped off to the side like this. I'm not 100% sure that I like it. Go figure that I have this long stretch of time between videos, and whenever I get back to making videos, this is the topic that I want to talk about. The problem with mainstream comics. I almost didn't want to make this video, but here's what prompted me to make it. There were a couple of different forces at play. The first being I started working at my local comic shop before Christmas, so I've been there for a month or two now. The other thing is that one of my fellow webcomic creators, Sam Deely, the creator of Woo Hooligan, got into a Twitter flame war, basically, about diversity in comics. We'll get to this. The other thing too is that I've also been speaking with people who worked at other comic shops, and I did speak with a lady at West Virginia Pop Culture Con in August of last year. She worked with Diamond Distributors, and I'll get to that in a second. So here's what makes me laugh. There are fanboys that seem to think that the problem with mainstream comics and the reason that they're not selling a bunch is because of diversity in comics. And I laugh at them. I laugh so hard at them because mainstream comics are not the be-all end-all of the comics industry. There are also graphic novels, web comics, self-published comics, and a variety of other indie comics that are out there. Probably many of these fanboys have never heard of SPACE, the Self-Publishing Alternative Creators Expo. It happens in Columbus every year in April, and it is where a bunch of self-publishing indie creators all sell their stuff, and they make fairly good livings doing that kind of thing. There's also graphic novels like Raina Telgemeier's Smile. There's also webcomic creators like me. And there's a whole bunch of other webcomic creators. And there's Kickstarter. Kickstarter is amazing when it comes to comics. Oh my God. The problem with mainstream comics is not diversity in comics. It's the business model. Now, the business model can be basically boiled down to the problem with mainstream comics is Diamond Distributors. Hear me out. So, local comic shops all across the United States only have one distributor, and that is Diamond Comics. There are maybe one or two other small press publishers that also have their own distributing companies. Alterna is one of these. But 99% of all local comic shops go to Diamond to place their orders for comics, because Diamond Distributors is who sells Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Image Comics, Top Cow. Now, here's the thing with Diamond Distributors. Say that I want to sell a comic to Diamond Distributors so that they can then sell my comic to local comic shops. And that gets me connected to thousands of comic shops nationwide. The problem is that Diamond Distributors' cut of my profits is 60%, if not more. Say that I want to sell 10 copies of Johnson & Sir. Johnson & Sir goes for $15 a copy. We're not going to get into the math in regards to like how much it costs per issue to print it. So that would be $150 worth of books. They would take $120 of that, and I would only see 30. If I only ever want to see $30 of sales of my comic, I would go to a comic convention and sell 2 copies. I don't need to sell 10 copies of my book to Diamond Distributors to get the same amount of profit as selling 2 books at a comic convention. That's just the simplified math of it. I know that there's some more complicated math because then you have to get into how much it costs per copy to print the book and how much it would cost with consignments. And the point is that Diamond Distributors takes a very sizable cut of your profits. The only way that comic creators can break even is if they sell upwards of 2,000 copies. Some maths say about 3. The only people who can afford that kind of run are going to be big comic companies like Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image. The people who have been in the game and have struck up deals with Diamond distributors in order to sell these thousands of books. Think of it like cake. This is how I've come to think of Diamond distributors and the problem with mainstream comics is think of cake. So imagine that there is one cake company. They have baked this enormous cake, and this cake can feed 2,000 people. It is that large of a cake. Use your imagination here, bear with me. So this cake that can feed 2,000 people is available for sale. However, there are people who are lining up trying to get this cake, but the design on the cake is not what you would call wedding cake design. It's more like a overly ambitious 10-year-old placed a order to see all of these little cartoon characters on the face of this cake. So people who are not into cartoons don't want to get into the cake. So let's say 1,000 people leave. So that leaves 1,000 people left to devour this cake that can feed 2,000 people. Still kind of feasible for 1,000 people to eat this 2,000 people cake. Then the company that made this cake slices into it and reveals that the inside of the cake is vanilla. And it is like 50% icing. And so there are going to be people who are like, ugh, I don't like icing. That is my least favorite part of the cake, and that's like half of this cake slice, blah. Let's say you lose 500 people that way. That means there's 500 people left to eat this 2,000 people cake. Now, before this person who baked this cake hands you the slice, he says, now, keep in mind that this cake was baked with cricket flour. Then, those 500 people that are left, half of them leave because they're weirded out by the idea of eating a cake that was baked with cricket flour. So they leave. Now you have only 250 people left to eat this cake intended for 2,000 people. That is the problem with mainstream comics. Mainstream comics as a business model encourages niching to the point where it's not feasible to make a profit off of it. I do not like creators selling out trying to please everybody. It's not feasible to create comics that please everybody. By pleasing everybody, you please nobody. The problem, though, is that mainstream comics as a business model, if we're going back to the cake analogy, they've only ever worked with one distributor. This distributor makes this massive cake, but this cake is so nichified that only a small percentage of people are going to eat that cake. And then you have like these massive leftovers from this cake that nobody else wants to eat because it's been so made specifically for a small subset of fans that only those fans are going to eat that cake. Nobody else will want to eat that cake. So people who complain that diversity is ruining comics kind of forget that the business model of mainstream comics is not built for maximum profit. It is built to cater to a small audience, and that's it. As for me, I don't want to do this cake game, so I'm not participating in that. I would rather just avoid the baking company altogether and bake my own cupcakes. Going back to the cake analogy, that's what I'm doing. To tie this in with actual real world examples as to why this business model is a problem. I'm signed on to the email newsletter list for Alterna Comics. Alterna is one of those companies that, yes, they have a contract with Diamond Distributors to get their comics into local comic shops across the United States, but they also have their own distributing arm of their company. Not only do they publish comics, they help distribute comics. So in an email update they had sent earlier this month, January 2018, they talked about what Diamond was doing in 2017. As it turns out, Diamond Comics in 2017 dropped 2,000 of their orders. 2,000 orders is a lot of orders to drop in a year. That's 2,000 sales gone. And that's a problem. That is a problem no matter what size company you are. If your distributor is dropping 2,000 orders / reorders of your product, stop working with that company. But Alterna is still working with Diamond Distributors because their own distributing arm hasn't quite picked up steam yet, and Diamond has a monopoly on distributing comics in the comics industry. This is why there are legislations against monopolies, because of Diamond Distributors. I can also say this from working at a local comic shop. Diamond Distributors messes up orders all the time. Like, there was one week that I came in and my manager signed off on a package, and she opened up the package from Diamond Distributors, and it was this one large box. And in this large box were two smaller boxes. One box was for us. The other box was for a comic shop on the opposite side of the state. This is a fairly regular occurrence with Diamond Distributors. They are sending us the wrong stuff all the time. They are sending the wrong stuff to other comic shops all the time. The problem, though, there's a lot of problems, but the big one being that unless there's a sizable enough distributor to compete with Diamond, Diamond is going to be the only comics distributor, and they're going to be the only people in charge of what people see at local comic shops. I remember seeing a statistic somewhere that sales at local comic shops in 2017 dropped 10%. It might be more. It might be over 10% that sales at comic shops have dropped. Between Alterna reporting that Diamond Distributors dropped 2,000 of their orders in the last year, between the business model that I described using the cake analogy, and between Diamond Distributors constantly sending comic shops the wrong thing all the time, it's no wonder that the mainstream comics industry is losing money. The only way that they're going to get their money back is not by including diversity in their comics. That's kind of a step in the right direction, but that's kind of like, it's kind of like putting a Hershey's Kiss on top of that 2,000 person cake that I described. It might look aesthetically pleasing on that one slice of cake, but it does not fix how that cake gets to the people who are consuming that cake. It does not fix the underlying business problems. If you want to fix the comics industry, get another distributor that can be competitive with Diamond Distributors. Especially get a comics distributor that actually takes good care of their comics. I swear to goodness, like every other package that we get from Diamond has busted up comics somewhere in the package. There's comics that have bent spines. There's trade paperbacks that we can't use because either the printer misprinted the inside comics, or when Diamond Distributors put it in the package, it warped the covers in some way, or it like tore the covers in some way. That happens a lot. That happens way more than you know. So, yeah. You want to fix comics? Fix the business model. Kickstarter is a step in the right direction. And this I picked up from Tyler James, who runs Comics Launch. You know, I'm name dropping a lot of things. All the links for everything that I'm name dropping can be found in the doobly-doo. So Tyler James is one of those people that, he's not shy to admit this either, he declared war on the fact that when he started Comics Launch years ago, he noticed that comics projects seeking funding on Kickstarter only succeeded like 46% of the time. Now, in 2017, which was the last year that they got numbers figuring out like how many percentage of comics projects get funding, that went from like 46% to 54%. Comics is the only subset of projects on Kickstarter that have actually seen growth. That is because diversity does sell, just not through Diamond. It sells through Kickstarter. Kickstarter is where the good shit is at. Pardon my French. I mean, I'm an adult, so... This is stuff that isn't just observed from the last couple of months through working at a local comic shop or from that flame war that my colleague got involved in or anything like that. I've been making comics for 5 years. And this is something that I've noticed. And I've seen growth of my own comics through Kickstarter projects. There is a demand for comics that have people of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or otherwise queer or questioning characters in there. There is a demand for these kinds of stories. Diamond Distributors as a business model is not built to satisfy that demand, because Diamond Distributors is only built to satisfy the demands of Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image comics readers. It is not built for the demands of people who read graphic novels, webcomics, or who support comics through Kickstarter. Who knows, maybe Kickstarter could be that alternate comics distributor that we're asking for? I don't think so, because Kickstarter doesn't really have a distributing arm. It outsources that to other companies like Backer Kit and things like that. But for people who think that mainstream comics is dying because of diversity in comics, I laugh at you, because clearly you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. That's all. Thanks for watching this unusually long video from me. I'm gonna get back to comics because I need to gear up my Kickstarter campaign for The Case of the Wendigo, since that wrapped up within the last week. And I also need to get back to producing Validation comics. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching. You are awesome.